All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kevin Herholz, joining you here from Turning Technologies. I'd like to take this opportunity and welcome everybody into today's webinar, where we're going to talk about a 5-step recipe for strengthening accountability in your organization with a very special guest presenter, Peter DeMarco. Now, before we go ahead and begin, let's just go over a couple of different housekeeping items. So first and foremost, in the room with me, part of the Turning Technologies team, I have Chuck Regroots and I also have Christy Campaner. Now, our main job is to go ahead and field any questions you have throughout today's session. So if there's any direct questions that you want to go ahead and ask Peter, feel free to go ahead and submit those questions using your chat and Q&A within your GoToWebinar controls. And myself, Chuck, and Christy will go ahead and field those questions, and then either at the end or periodically throughout the session, we'll pose those questions live over to Peter. Now, if you notice on my slide, lower right-hand side, it says join the mobile session, and there's a URL on there as well as the session ID. Now, Peter is going to be asking you questions using the Turning Point software throughout today's session, and you can respond to those questions by opening up a separate browser. It's at ttpool.com, and it's going to immediately ask you for that session ID, and of course, that will be accountability. Now, if you want to go ahead and download our app, you could do that on your iPhone or Android device. You would just be searching for the Turning Point app. Once you download it, again, you can open it up and put in the session ID accountability. Chuck and Christy, if you guys don't mind to send that through the chat with the TT poll and accountability. That way for all the folks, they can go ahead and see it as they come in. All right, so with no further delay, let me go ahead and take this opportunity and introduce our very special guest presenter today. With us, we have Peter DeMarco. Peter is the founder and head coach of Priority Thinking, where he supports his clients as an executive coach, organizational consultant, ethics facilitator, and strategic advisor, helping leaders and their teams achieve significant professional growth and performance improvements while reducing risk and embedding ethical power into decision-making at all levels. Peter's clients are mostly in the business space and include a long list of notable companies. Peter also facilitates leadership and ethics education programs for emerging leaders around the country. He was designated as a top thought leader in 2014 as well as 15 by Trust Across America, Trust Around the World. His forthcoming book, Good to Know, The Goodwill Leader, is due out sometime here in 2020. Peter, again, it's so great to have you with us. And so in just a moment, Peter's going to go ahead and have the ability to share his screen. And Peter, at the time you do, so I'm going to go ahead and take a step back, give you the stage here, and if you need anything, let us know. But otherwise, everyone, we'll let Peter take over at this time.
Hey, just to kick off, a little bit about our company. As Kevin told you, we do executive coaching, organizational development, ethics education programs. Been around for 16 years. You can learn more about us at prioritythinking.com. A little bit about our relationship with Turning Technologies. We've been using the polling devices since 2007. We consider ourselves power users. We have over 900 physical devices, 300 soft pads, and frankly, our programs and tools would never be as successful as they are without Turning Technologies. So we kind of consider them a critical partner in our adult education and integrative programs that we do on leadership, ethics, etc. So I want to thank the folks at Turning Technologies for all they've done for us. Okay, into our topic today. A 5-step recipe for strengthening accountability in your organization. I'm going to provide this presentation to Kevin after we're done, but if you go out to Forbes, type in Peter DeMarco, 5-step recipe for accountability, the article will pop up. It was published in April of 2017. That's a shorter article of the presentation I'll give you today. So this topic of accountability, it often elicits a variety of interactions from folks. And what I'd like to do is give you a quick overview on the topic, what we'll cover, and invite you to chat as we go along and ask questions. I'll do my best to answer. As Kevin told you, we'll be using the polling pads, the soft pads he's provided, so please participate so we can move along. All right, three topics today. First, what does accountability mean? It's an interesting word, packed with power, and it means a lot of different things to folks. Second, the bulk of the presentation today, about 30 minutes to 35, we're going to cover the ingredients for accountability within an organization. And this is the most critical part of understanding accountability, because if you want to activate the potential in your people, i.e. their personal qualities for increasing accountability, understanding the organizational ingredients is important. We'll conclude probably about 5 to 7 minutes around the personal ingredients. We'll combine them, and then I'll answer any of your questions. So to get started, I got 2 questions for you. The first one is on your role in your organization. Please click 1 if you're a leader, 2 an individual contributor, and then as the presentation moves along, I'll periodically slice your responses by leader or individual contributor. So take a moment and answer as quickly as you can.
And Peter, as everybody's sorry about that, Peter. As everybody's responding, just a reminder again, you can participate in these questions by opening up a separate browser and making your way to ttpoll.com. It's ttpoll.com. It'll immediately ask you for the session ID, and that will be accountability. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, we'll give it about 10 more seconds here. We've got 66 people attending, about 20 responding, and as you log in, feel free to join in on the conversation. Okay, so I'm going to close the polling. We'll just see what the current split is. And okay, we're about a 50-50 split, 21 folks out of 66 so far. Let's go to the next question. My attitude towards accountability tends to be 1, negative, 2, positive. So choose 1 if you tend to get a negative or negative reaction to it or see it as a necessary evil, or 2, positive, accountability is an opportunity for growth. Go ahead and answer. Okay, very good. I'm going to close the polling. All right. Generally, the audience today, 81% of you see it as a positive opportunity for growth, but not so small plurality see it as a negative or necessary evil. Good. Let's move along. All right, so those were your views on accountability. Let's go now into the practice of accountability in your organization. Quickly, what kind of practices do you observe in your organization with respect to accountability? Does it tend to be weak or bad, poor? 2, average, okay, marginal? Or 3, strong, good? All right, I'm going to close the polling. And as you can see here, we almost a perfect standard normal distribution there. Let's just quickly slice the data. And for those of you familiar with this capability within Turning Point, I'm going to just look at what the leaders have to say. All right, not much change there. A little bit stronger on the weaker side there, if you will, or weaker response went up. And for individual contributors, you can see the shift to the right there slightly. Okay, very good. Thank you. All right, next question. Where I work, leaders, and this is just about the leaders in your organization, hold themselves more accountable than they do their employees. Do you agree or disagree with that statement? So choose 1 for disagree, 2 for agree. Okay, very good. I'm going to close the polling here shortly. Wow, we got a perfect split there. All right, let's see what the leaders have to say about this one. So here's the leaders. And the leaders tend to agree that they hold themselves more accountable than they do their employees. And now I'm going to switch over and see what the individual contributors thought. And I think you can see a pretty big shift occurred there. 38% agree, 63% disagree. So I often come across this kind of divergence of views around how leaders see themselves versus their employees. And it's a challenge and a topic hopefully I'll be able to address today as we go through. So just resetting it back to the original responses we had, which was a 50-50 split. All right, next question. When my organization experiences a bad situation or issue, our leaders tend to, 1, fix the problem, 2, fix the blame. Okay, 1 for fix the problem, 2 for fix the blame. Okay, very good. All right, 3 to 1 there, fix the problem. That's good. Let's just quickly, I'll just do one more slice here to see how the individual contributors viewed that. And a little bit higher on fix the blame, as you can see it there. And then the leaders, again, it's much lower. So leaders, if you're on the call, there's a communications gap or perception gap that can occur in organizations. Important to get those feedback loops and see how employees are perceiving it. One quick comment, fixing the problem is an important part of fixing accountability in an organization. But understanding who is accountable, what a word we'll use is blame, depends on how blame is assigned or accepted within the organization. So it's an important quality is blame does need to be assigned at some point. But it's important at first to focus on the what before you really begin to focus on the who. All right, let's move along. So here's how I'd like you to think about accountability. It's a habit, and a habit means it's a fully formed quality in a person of accepting responsibility for one's choices and actions, or, and this is an important statement, fulfilling one's duty to hold another person accountable for his or her choices and actions. So if you're a leader, you have a duty to hold others accountable for their choices and actions. And properly done, and this may sound like an odd statement, it is a form of love. And the way we define love and goodwill leadership is willing the true good for another person. So accountability is a necessary activity as a professional, maturing a human person, growing our children into adolescence and then into adulthood. It's an essential activity to fully form a human personality and person. Now for leaders, leaders can subdivide their responsibilities, and in fact they need to. We call this delegation, division of labor, etc. But ultimate accountability in any organization lies at the top. And that's the small distinction that I would draw between responsibility and accountability. They're tightly linked, but for those of you wondering about the distinction, remember accountability is at the top, but when we subdivide those responsibilities, leaders are holding you accountable as kind of a proxy for ultimate accountability. So, what are the ingredients that we need to increase organizational accountability? Here are the 5 I'm going to cover. First, the employee and the leader have to be qualified to act. Second, they have to have the freedom to act. Third, the authority to act. Fourth, the tools to act. And finally, the leadership supporting their ability to act. So we're going to cover these 5 first. So the ingredient, first ingredient, qualified to act. What do we mean by that? All right, let's ask a couple questions first. Which is the primary way that employees at your company become qualified to do their jobs? Now, the primary way means what you generally see occurring. 1, formal training. 2, on-the-job training. Go ahead and choose 1 or 2. Okay, closing the polling. Okay, this is not an uncommon response. On the job or OJT is frequently the way people become qualified to do their jobs. And of course, formal training is an important dimension as well. You really need both, of course. I'm going to give you a little bit of a tip on what I recommend for folks to do in this area. All right, next question. We only have 2 in this particular category, qualified to act. To what extent are the majority of employees you work with qualified to do their jobs? So think about that, the folks that you work with, to what extent are they qualified? 1, not much. 2, somewhat. 3, mostly. 4, completely. Okay, I'm going to close the polling. And I think you can see here the distribution, 38% somewhat, 46% mostly, and 17% completely. Let's just do another quick split on this. And this time I'm going to see what the folks that view accountability kind of in a negative way. All right, you can see that shift to the left of somewhat. Now we're going to see the folks that view it positively. There's more of a shift to the right. And this is an important one here. Let's just look at what the leaders had to say first. Okay, pretty even there. And then, of course, individual contributors. Okay, more of a shift to the left. So, again, you can see some of the diverging views between leaders and individual contributors here, especially if you're a leader in your organization. Keep these differences in mind. All right, next. Let's go here. Let me summarize what qualification to act means and why it's important to accountability. Employees can only be held accountable for what they know and are capable of performing. So this is very important when you're conducting your performance feedback or doing job design, things like that. One of the biggest shortfalls I find when I go in and work with organizations is they have not determined what constitutes a qualified person in the job. The OJT system has really been or that on-the-job training process has been the primary way of qualifying people, and the standards tend to be elastic and flexible, and so you get different views of what it means to be qualified. So here are 3 tips to help you with being qualified to act, or at least increasing accountability in this first part of our recipe. So my suggestion is work on your employee readiness and training programs so that you have 3 levels. The first level is make sure the employee is trained. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't pair up employees with an experienced employee to train them on the job, but have some way of showing that the employee went through essential training steps, at least the minimum amount of knowledge required to do the job. Second, training isn't enough. Okay, we have to experience the job. This is critical, especially for adults, is we tend to learn by doing. So then assess their level of experience. And then the third highest level that I recommend is certify those employees as fully qualified or qualified enough to perform that job habitually well. Okay, so in the factories that I've run in Mexico and the US, and some of them were very large, I made sure we had this 3-step program in place, and it was often very helpful for us when we were dealing with safety incidents or quality issues, et cetera, to go back and look at the training records and see what level of that the employees had been trained at and certified at. All right, next. Okay, we've got a little bit of a freeze going on here, Kevin, just a minute. Okay, there we go. All right, the next one that I'd like to show you is freedom to act. Now, this is a bit of a tricky topic, so let's open up with a quick question, all right? What does freedom to you mean? 1, that there's no authority over you. 2, you can do what you want. Or 3, choosing what is right. So just tend to think of what you think of freedom to mean in that context, okay? Okay, I'm going to close the polling. Okay, the majority of you said choosing what is right, 25% doing what I want, and 13% said no authority over me. All of these are, in fact, levels of freedom, and we have experienced this throughout our life. So when we're, working with our kids, perhaps as teenagers, they don't want to have anyone to have any authority over them. But we can also look at this lowest level of freedom from authority as really freedom from addiction or freedom from being kind of enslaved. It's kind of a catch-all at the bottom there. Number 2, doing what I want. Well, this is an important part of freedom, is we want to be able to choose our purpose in life, things that we want to be able to go out and do. But the highest level of freedom, the one most necessary for having full accountable, is the freedom to choose excellence. The ancient Greeks actually called this freedom of excellence virtue, which was literally a habit of choosing correctly. So for the ancient Greeks, they looked at this freedom of choosing the real good over the apparent good, the authentic good over the fake good, or the greater good over the lesser good. It's absolutely essential for maturing as a person and gaining an understanding of accountability is understanding we need the highest level of freedom. So here's some suggestions for you on how to cultivate the freedom to act in your organization. First, link free choice to qualified choice. In other words, we really can't choose what we don't know. So it's very important to provide employees feedback on what constitutes good, better, and best in their choice making. Leaders, in particular, have to tolerate failure as employees learn how to choose the correct choice or the better choice. The other thing I encourage folks to do is have peer-to-peer responsibility in your organization. In fact, I think in the most mature organizations, if you want to increase accountability, have peer-to-peer review systems occur. And when I used to do peer-to-peer reviews, I would actually tell the leadership team, we are not going to look at the results. We're going to let the peers rate each other, stack rank each other, and let them get a feel for how they're viewed by their teammates. It's a great way to increase accountability and cultivate free choice among peers so that they begin to see whether they're acting selfishly or selflessly. And then most importantly, we have to align punishments in organizations for those who engage in plausible deniability or avoid making necessary judgment making in what constitutes an excellent choice. We don't like that word punishment, but the reality is to increase accountability, we have to let folks know when we see them running away from freedom to choose excellently. All right, the third ingredient, okay, this is an important one, is the authority to act. And this one is perhaps the fulcrum point, if you will, of the five. So let me begin with again, a short question. What do you believe employees will more likely demonstrate the authority to act if leaders, one, empower them, or two, give them responsibilities? Go ahead and choose, one or two. Okay, great. I'm going to close the polling. Okay, the vast majority of you, almost 90%, said empower them, and only 11% said give them responsibilities. I'm going to give you a bit of a contrarian view today. The problem with empowerment is that it feels much better than it actually is. Now, that may sound like a surprising statement, but if we give power, it also means we can take power. If you think about the fact that all individuals have power within them to make choices, then what we should be trying to do is actually give them responsibilities that activate the authority they have to do their job. Now, Peter Drucker, probably one of the most famous management thinkers of the 20th century, actually did not like the word empowerment. He believed in giving people responsibilities, and that would actually increase their authority to act. But it's understandable why we use the word empowerment, because we're trying to get people to activate their own powers that they contain within them. The problem is, and I hear this a lot from employees, is, my boss gives me power, and then when I screw up, he takes away power. So I encourage organizations that are trying to increase healthy accountability to avoid using the word empowerment and go towards these structural ingredients, these 5 ingredients we're talking about. Now, there's a little bit more to this, so let me go to the next slide here and explain, okay? I'm sorry, let's just do one more question. How willing are employees in your organization to make choices in their work without seeking approval from above? In other words, they know what to do and they go do it without seeking approval. Or they may know what they're doing, but still seek approval. In other words, this can happen a lot in organizations. Okay, very good. Let's close the polling. All right, 28% very little, 60% of you, vast majority, said somewhat, and 12% mostly. So if you have an organization where your employees are qualified to do the work as far as been trained, and they still go to the boss to seek approval, then there is some degree of arbitrariness occurring in which the employees are not sure what constitutes the excellent choice. So just examine that. But I'm going to give you let me give you a little bit of an overview on how to cultivate this authority to act in your organization. First, and this is just kind of one of those basic principles, is the flatter the organizational structure, the more you're going to find that employees will take the authority to act. Too many layers in an organization impede communications, and they actually pull authority, if you will, into the org structure, so there's more control than there is actual decision making going on. All right. Second, a very ancient principle called subsidiarity, which says that decision making should lie at the lowest level possible in an organization. So when you're designing an organization, try to drive that decision making down to the lowest level possible. For those of you who are as old as me, you may remember communism actually violated this fundamental principle of subsidiarity. It would tell children in communist countries to report their parents to the state, and the state took priority over the rearing of children. That was a violation of subsidiarity. So we don't really empower parents. We actually tell them that they have the right, the authority to act with their children. And that authority is something natural to them. That's not granted to them by the state. It just exists within them. So good job design, good expectation set, frequent communications, all of these things cultivate the authority to act and activate within the employee the natural decision rights they should have if they're qualified to act, and if they're free to act, then this natural authority to act will emerge. But it requires leadership to support that through good communications and design, organizations that are flat, etc. Okay, the fourth ingredient, the tools act. Nothing more frustrating to employees and leaders is if they don't have the tools to get the job done. So, quick question. To what extent do your employees have the tools they need to perform their jobs well? Okay, answer 1, not much. 2, somewhat. 3, mostly. 4, completely. And by the way, feel free to use the chat box if you have some comments or questions that are emerging as we get near the end of the presentation. Okay, I'm going to close the polling. Okay, very good. It's 85% of you said completely or mostly, and only 15% somewhat. So shortage of tools doesn't appear to be the problem. It could be some of these other problems or the next topic we're going to cover. So let me just summarize when it comes to providing tools to act. Making sure the right tools are available to do the job is, of course, obvious. But seeing if employees actually understand what they need to do the job well is another thing. When I work with leaders and we'll go sit with their employee teams and see what tools they're using, many times employees have either forgotten that they have a tool available to them, or the leader hasn't inspected the condition of those tools to make sure that the investment the company made is being utilized to do the work. So leaders have to teach the importance of maintaining the tools and then get the employees to hold each other accountable for keeping those tools properly maintained so that you get the best use of those tools and get the return on investment that the company paid for. All right, and finally, the fifth ingredient in organizational accountability, not surprising, the leadership to act. This, of course, is the capstone, and if the other four ingredients are in place, the leadership to act can suffocate all the good work that's been done on these first four layers. So let's talk about it just briefly. Okay, this question: to what extent do your leaders set clear expectations with employees as to what they are accountable for? 1 is none, 2 minimally, 3 somewhat, 4 mostly, 5 completely. Okay, I'm going to close the polling here. Okay, we've got a nice little distribution here. So let's slice the data by the role that you all have. And so I'm going to see what the leaders have to think first. So you can see the shift to the right somewhat. that the employees or the leaders tend to think that they're setting clear expectations for what employees are accountable for. All right, the next slice is going to show the individual contributor's view. Okay, actually not much of a change there either. It's pretty good. So in this particular sample of 25 folks, we still have a majority feeling mostly or completely that leaders are setting clear expectations as to what employees are accountable for. So here I'm going to reset it. There is your there's your response there. So actually the leadership response in that particular question was lower. So that's interesting. So let's go to the next, let me summarize this one on showing the leadership to act. In the Goodwill Leader model that we advocate, we say communications is not just a quality or a characteristic of leadership. We say it's at the very core of leadership. So leaders have to constantly be communicating and re-emphasizing all of the things we just talked about. Second, role modeling. Role modeling by far is the best way that leaders can communicate and support accountability in the organization. However, measuring is very important because we move from kind of a subjective to an objective view of what constitutes standards of excellence. So measuring performance is a great way of creating accountability because it's showing people what's important in the organization. And then finally, enforcing or inspecting means that leaders are going around and checking on things. Now, of course, there's a good way and a bad way to inspect. Frequently, one of the tools that we'll talk about that the Army and the Marine Corps use frequently is called a brief back inspection. They'll give a mission to their soldiers or Marines, and then they'll just turn to the Marines or the soldiers, and they know they got their weapons and all the ordnance that they need, and they'll say, "Hey, tell me what your understanding of this mission is." Those kind of simple ways will make sure that the leaders are giving all of the tools and communications necessary for accountability to occur. But the most important way, I believe, that leaders can contribute to accountability is this: educating. Leaders must be educators, and we can only learn from someone who is truly superior to us, i.e., they have authority on the subject. So the best way for role modeling accountability when it comes to these structural things is that leaders take on the education and make sure that people are qualified to act, have the freedom to act, or have the authority to act and the tools to act, and then they combine those into a complete educational program so that the employees can feel full accountability. Now, that takes care of what I call the organizational ingredients for accountability. Next, let's move to what constitutes the 5 ingredients for personal accountability. So let me review one more time. Organizational ingredients for accountability are 1, the qualified to act, 2, the freedom to act, 3, the authority to act, 4, the tools to act, and 5, the leadership to act. Now, those are the organizational ingredients for accountability. All right, next, I'd like to cover the personal ingredients for accountability. So when assessing accountability in yourself, or you're trying to develop your subordinates if you're a leader and yourself, okay, look for these 5 ingredients. And by the way, when I list them out in this order, it's because we find that the most power comes from the sequencing of these priorities. Okay, so first, judgment. Second, initiative. Third, sense of urgency. Fourth, attention to detail. And finally, willingness to disclose. So let me cover those, and then we can talk about it. Okay, first, the ingredient of personal accountability. Judgment. All right, so if you look back and you think about that, the ingredients of organizational accountability around qualified to act and the freedom to act. Judgment is our exercise of our intellect to decide whether a deed can and should be done. If you're a leader, you should be concerned with what constitutes the doable deed. Okay, so remember that word, the doable deed. Okay, so if I see someone drowning out in a pond, let's say, and I can't swim, right? Well, that's not a doable deed for the person who can't swim. It would constitute poor judgment to go try to serve or save the person. The better judgment would be to find somebody who can save the drowning person. That's an example of the doable deed. Okay? So judgment means that we can actually choose correctly what constitutes the greater good over the lesser good, etc. All right, the second ingredient of personal accountability is initiative. So if we judge correctly about what can be done, then doing what needs to be done means we have to take action. So taking the initiative means, okay, we know it, and we begin to move on. So the common quote I tell folks is, people with high sense of initiative are masters of their own destiny versus victims of their own doing, right? So the second ingredient for personal accountability is that you take the initiative. You don't wait to be told. Okay, the third ingredient. So once we've exercised good judgment and we're taking the initiative, well, we still have to have a sense of urgency. We have to make sure that we understand when this particular thing has to be done or this problem has to be dealt with. Now, sometimes folks can have an excessive sense of urgency and they can become impulsive or expedient or take shortcuts. A sense of urgency means that you've made the right judgment about what should be done and you've taken the initiative and you're using your sense of urgency to deliberate or take decisive action in the time frame that is appropriate for that problem or situation, etc. All right, the fourth ingredient for personal accountability is attention to detail. So again, if a person has good judgment, takes the initiative, sense of urgency, we still have to get things right. We have to operate at the level of accuracy, or what I like to use the word is the level of precision required to accomplish a task. So the ancients have a great quote on this, that wisdom is reflected in the person who knows the level of precision that a situation or a thing permits. So remember that in attention to detail. If you're asking somebody to dot something to the second decimal point when a whole number is sufficient, then you're asking for something beyond an appropriate level of attention to detail. And then finally, the fifth ingredient of personal accountability, and this is the hardest one, is a willingness to disclose. What I like to tell people about this is highly mature, professional people are willing to tell their superiors and their colleagues the status of something or how things are going without being told to do it. So in really highly mature, high-functioning people with a high sense of conscience and accountability, is they'll go tell their boss, hey boss, I want to let you know how this is going. We had a problem. You're not going to see it on the profit and loss statement this month, but it's going to show up in a couple months. Here's what happened. I didn't want you to be surprised. Oh, by the way, I took the initiative to start a problem-solving process, and we're working on it. I'll keep you status. When I get into organizations where there's a low willingness to disclose, then you can tell that that there's a problem with accountability, either fear or people don't feel it's their job. And usually the cases, there tends to be more fear. So this is the toughest. It takes courage, but it's an essential ingredient. And the best way, of course, is if leaders stand up and begin to disclose what's going on, and in some cases, frankly, disclose where they screwed up, then they can role model this fifth and most important ingredient of personal accountability. All right, so now if we put those two together, organizational accountability, being with that Qualification to Act, Freedom to Act, Authority to Act, Tools to Act, and Leadership to Act, and then we look across the top there at personal accountability, well, now you've got a very nice matrix here forming where you can look within your organization and see where's the constraint on activating full accountability within our organization. Okay, so let me pause here for a minute and see if there's any comments or questions that our participants might have.
Good, I had a couple questions come in here. So the first one, going back a few slides here, dealt with flattening the organization. So when you're flattening the organization, can you talk a little bit more in detail about some of the pitfalls of a more nonlinear organization where you have varying levels when it comes to personal accountability and also comes to leadership accountability. I know that you had a bullet point on that, but a question came in a little while back in regards to expanding on some of the risk and rewards on flattening organization and more of a clear definition on what you mean by that topic.
Yeah, this is this is a challenging one. I think if you go look at some of the organizations that have flat organizational structures like Walmart, Costco, some of these other ones where store managers, there's a lot of power at that store manager level. The design in these organizations, when they're flattening them out, is because they've put the right tools and all of the supporting mechanisms in place, and they have very strong training systems. So Container Store is another one. All of them have driven down decision making so that the employees can make the choice. So those layers should be a function of the nature of the organization. So for example, if you're in the financial services industry where the regulatory controls might be more strict, well, you might have to have some additional layers to have the appropriate decisions and decision controls in place so that the risks of a bad decision don't take the organization down. It may surprise people, but the military is actually operates with flatter organizational structures than most business people realize. And the reason is that they realize that once the once those platoons or companies are in contact with the enemy, there's really not there's very little control that can be exercised except for those that can be activated through communications. So the other critical dynamic at work in how flat your organization structure can be is the health of the communications infrastructure within that organization. It's a very broad topic. Let me pause, Kevin, and ask the participant if I got close to giving some additional insight on that.
Yeah, so no confirmation on that yet, Peter, so we'll go ahead and wait on it. But I know that another question Chuck wants to go ahead and address.
Sure, Peter. We had a question from one of the clients on, can you clarify more on how the last table is being used to evaluate organization versus personal accountability, please?
You mean as far as this matrix go?
Yes.
Is that what you're referring? Yeah. So
that's correct.
Well, what I try to do is get organizations to look at whether or not the structure in their organization is cultivating these 5 qualities of personal accountability. So, for example, in qualification to act, okay, a good training system is going to assess the judgment of an employee, right? It's even going to cultivate the initiative of an employee. So, for example, hey, when you experience this particular problem as you're assembling the product, okay, and you experience this difficulty, here's what you can do. In other words, they begin to teach the employees at the most basic level what to do. But in organizations that are really cultivating initiative, they'll give employees the tools like good problem-solving tools or diagnostic equipment, etc. Another key factor that helps with these personal accountability aligning to the organizational accountability is the line of sight that the employees have to the voice of the customer. When I go into organizations and I can see that the employees see what the customers are experiencing, especially in manufacturing firms, but even in service firms. I've worked in a lot of financial service industries, mortgage banking, insurance, etc. Okay, the line of sight to the voice of the customer actually increases personal accountability if the employee knows how to take care of the customer. So if you look at those 5 qualities, and then you look at the structural things, then you can begin to go through each box and ask yourself, hey, how are we doing as an organization in cultivating their judgment? So for example, judgment aligned with freedom to act is, how do we see if they're choosing the right thing to do? A lot of the ethics problems that organizations have is they become too relative in their thinking about competing goods. So, they say right versus right. Well, that can be too ambiguous to the employee who's trying to cultivate judgment, which is a greater good over a lesser good. See, a lot of for example, if we go back to judgment, a lot of that comes from cultivating what constitutes excellence and linking it back to each one of these categories. So, this particular matrix takes a while for an organization to begin to navigate through. And of course, I have tools that are in much more depth with this. But the basic framework you can apply in your organization, which is, hey, let's just check along these 5 personal qualities what is happening structurally in an organization. The last comment on that willingness to disclose, that is the ultimate canary in the coal mine. Because if an employee or even a leader will come forward, especially leaders actually, will come forward and disclose reality, the truth of what happened, then you're finding out where other issues might be broken or damaged or need reinforcement. So let me pause, see if I've answered that question sufficiently.
Yeah, Peter, I think you answered that rather thoroughly. I do appreciate that.
I got one more that came in. You had mentioned in the presentation giving employees more responsibility. In your experience, Peter, how has that worked best? By starting small and letting them build on that, or giving them more responsibility up front and seeing what they can handle?
Wow, what a great question. I'd like to tell a little story. I teach crisis leadership and ethical leadership at some top MBA programs, and one of those programs is the Fuqua School of Business at Duke University. And I'm a guest lecturer there. And during one of the sessions, Coach K came in to talk about why a particular star player he had recruited to the team had not done well. And the MBA students in the room were questioning Coach K. And he stood up and he took full accountability. He said, you know what? It was my fault. This kid was a great basketball player in high school, but I threw him into the deep end and I let him flounder too long, when I should have walked him into the pool, into the shallow end, got his confidence up for playing with, in the Division I ball, and then worked my way to the deep end. And I was astounded by first of all, his use of the analogy was, most of the time, if employees are familiarized with what they're going to experience, you can build up their confidence versus just kind of throwing them in with that kind of sink or swim analogy that Coach K was providing. I would encourage you all that, there's very good ways to rapidly get an employee up to speed, but it's a building block approach. Rarely should you throw an employee into the deep end. Frankly, that's better done with leaders when you're trying to kind of introduce them to the chaotic nature of leadership at times. But even then, I tell folks, you still need a foundation in place. So that's the approach I would recommend is, if you're going to build responsibility, build it up as a building block approach, and then they'll begin to naturally connect the dots and activate their potential, and they'll bloom. Versus just kind of giving them power to act without all those building blocks becomes arbitrary then. Then employees feel like it's being removed from them when they screw up and granted to them when they're doing well, and it becomes an arbitrary will. And frankly, it generates what we call bad will versus goodwill. Goodwill is built through these kind of building block approach.
Peter, that was fantastic. Great response right there. So those are the questions that we had come in at this time. And Chuck, do you have anything?
No, I just want to remind everyone that we will share a link within 24, 48 hours.
Absolutely.
So you have a copy of this presentation. We'll also include Peter's contact information in case you have any follow-ups or you want to learn more about his programs. Peter's been a great partner, and we've appreciated everything that he and his team have done to help us and to get the word out about what our software can do to really turn your meetings and trainings just into an interactive back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Kevin, if folks could hold me accountable, tell me how I did today, and feel free to send me comments on what I could do to improve delivery of this session as well.
Fantastic, Peter. Very good. Well, again, as Chuck stated, thanks for everybody joining today's session. Peter, special thanks for you with an outstanding presentation, great content, and it's always a pleasure to have you facilitate on our behalf, your client's behalf, as well as ours. And again, as Chuck mentioned, we're recording the session. We'll send it out by midday tomorrow. And any follow-up questions or feedback, you're more than welcome to go ahead and respond to me. And anything pertinent to Peter, I'll be sure to go ahead and get it his way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Peter, thanks so much. Thanks, everybody.